Welcome to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping Orange County. With your host, Don Camber.
Hello, live from the OC Talk Radio studios at UCI's Beal Applied Innovation Center. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Don Camber with another great guest positively impacting our community. Today, I welcome First Five Orange County President and Chief Executive Officer Kim Goll. First Five Orange County was created as a result of Proposition 10, the California Children and Families Act of 1998, which added a 50-cent sales tax on tobacco products sold in California. Prop 10 required that the funds raised be used to support education, health, and child development for children from the prenatal stage through age 5. Thank you, Kim, for being on Impact OC.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for inviting me here to talk about all the great ways in which we ensure that kids can reach their full potential.
Well, Kim, please explain how your organization dispenses Prop 10 funds to meet its goal of envisioning an Orange County in which all children reach their full potential.
Terrific, Don. I'd love to do that. The first thing I think it's super important to frame is that because we are a voter-passed initiative, our responsibility is at population level changes, which is very different than an individual nonprofit, which is looking at impact to an individual or a family or a single interaction and positive interaction for one outcome. The important thing to note about Proposition 10 or First Five activities is we are responsible for improving the health and educational outcome of all kids in our county. So we are constantly looking at data to help drive our work. We have to frame out the ways in which we will prioritize our work and what's going to make the most impact for the most amount of kids in our county. So it's important to kind of shift a little bit to remember that we are a public agency responsible for making population level impact, meaning that it's not good enough for me to say I helped 1,500 kids today. Instead, I have to be able to say the kids are more ready for kindergarten because of the work First Five did, and this is how we have evidence for that linkage. What we impacted, here's the evidence, and here's the outcome for all kids in Orange County. So one, it changes a little bit the way in which we do our work. And one of the ways in which we organize our work and prioritize our work is we really focus that kids are 100% dependent on the adults around them to survive. Those first 5 years in particular, right? When we think of babies, they are engineered to cry, to draw attention, to get what they need. So it's really important to remember that none of this can be done without respecting and understanding the relationships that exist within a baby's life when they're born. So prenatal through 5, we look at all of the environments and the relationships within those environments to start to prioritize what we do. And so at First Five, our first sort of intervention or circle of work that we do is in the sphere of that child. What can we do to ensure that that child is going to develop as healthy as possible and reach that full potential? So for us, that looks like things within the pediatric health home. So think of pediatricians. Those of us that have been parents know that you spend a lot of time in those first couple of years in the pediatrician's office. Whether that's your scheduled well child visit or whether that's a sick visit, you're creating a relationship with that pediatrician and the people in that office. So how can First Five maximize that interaction to build better child health outcomes? What are we doing as a publicly funded entity with tobacco tax to improve each of those interactions so that parent is equipped to get the most out of that office visit, that provider, that pediatrician, that nurse, that case manager, whoever's in that pediatrician office, how are they orienting their work to make sure that that child is going to thrive? So some of the examples of things that we do is ensuring that parents have anticipatory guidance. What's going to happen at that pediatrician's visit? So you're not going in blind, you're going in understanding that that pediatrician is going to be asking you about these 5 things, and they're asking you about those things because it's indications of these other things. So here's So what's happening? Like how can we help you prepare to get really ready for that doctor's visit? The other side of the work that we do, so we do that through prenatal education, parent education, a lot of outreach to parents, and parent support. The other thing that we do is then putting pressure on the delivery system, saying, how can you do better? What evidence-based models are there out there that can help improve the interaction that you have with children and their parents? And how can we get the evidence-based models that we know exist throughout research that really improve that interaction embedded into Orange County pediatric practices? So one good example of that is an evidence-based model called Healthy Steps, which integrates behavioral health into those well child visits. So they're talking with that parent at the time of the well child about behavioral health supports, discipline, interaction, bonding, attachment, any behavioral concerns for the kid. And they're integrating a licensed behavioral specialist into their practice that they can immediately refer a family to right at that time of that well child visit. Imagine that. The other thing that's happening within that model is evidence-based tools. A lot of times pediatricians can eyeball a developmental issue with a kid when a parent has a question. What we know is while that works sometimes, it doesn't work all the time. And what works better is ensuring that every pediatrician is using an evidence-based developmental and behavioral health screening tool with that child. So First Five puts its money in and its investments in not only in educating parents and getting them ready for that visit, but how do we change the practice at the pediatric office, whether that's the integration of a behavioral health professional or whether that's an evidence-based model. We use our dollars to elevate that clinical practice and get that interaction at the highest level, the highest quality possible. So that's that first circle. That's an example of the kinds of things that we do that really impact that child. Seeing as dependent that child is on all the adults in their life, right? To be as attuned and as aware and as highly skilled as possible, identifying it. And the reason that we do this, and one of the things that I'm so committed to at First Five, is when we can identify a developmental issue early, even a behavioral issue early, we know that that child's outcomes are much more likely to reach their full potential. The earlier we can do intervention, the more that we can wrap around supports with that family, that child is going to do better. It's going to cost society less money. So those of us that are, fiscally conservative, it's the best thing we can do for our pocketbooks because the intervention is typically shorter and has better outcomes.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. Perfect example is speech and language therapy. Lots of kids need speech and language therapy around somewhere between 18 months and 36 months on the late side, it's identified. And we know that if we can get intervention to that child earlier, that the amount of time the intervention needs to take place is shortened. And the long-term impact for that child's ability to speak is greatly improved the earlier we can do that. And what we know right now is a lot of times, not every pediatrician, not all the time, but oftentimes pediatricians at the 18-month visit will tell them to just wait and see, even though the parent might be expressing a concern. Well, the next time that pediatrician might see that child could be past that window of speech development, which happens sometime between 18 and 24 months, right? We really want to see children speaking at 24 months. And if you don't, you kind of pass that window. So these are the kinds of evidence-based practices that we want to embed in pediatric offices. No fault of anyone. Pediatricians are asked to do way more than they can do in the time allotted and the reimbursement that's given to them, which again is why we wrap a tremendous amount of support around that office to try and figure out how we can change the practice to get it focused on the kids and the windows of opportunity. So speech and language is a great example of how we can affect change quickly. If we can get more kids into speech and language therapy earlier, it shrinks it, doesn't kick it to the school districts at the age of 3. It can happen earlier, and the outcome is better for kids.
What are some of the other issues?
So autism detection is another one that we've seen over the last 20 or so years really escalate in the diagnosis of it. We know that early intervention and comprehensive intervention for a kid, and the earlier we can get that screened and diagnosed and linked into service, is going to have a huge impact on that child's ability to reach their full potential.
How early can someone be diagnosed with autism?
It varies depending on the family issues. If you have sibling sets and other things that might be indicators, it can be a little earlier than others. But I don't know what the most recent research is on it, but I know that it can be done fairly early on, the minute we start to see a gap in the behavioral indications that it can be received. And again, that's why we press at that 9-month. The first time a developmental screening is done is to use an evidence-based tool.
Well, if a person is diagnosed with autism, can they not have autism later if they can be reached early, or will they always have autism? It's just they know how to deal with it.
I think it's more the latter. And I think that the interesting thing in our research and our work is the frame that autism isn't something that can be fixed. It's something that we
manage,
or even it could almost be a superpower for some people if you really are really supportive and you're thinking about, this is a unique individual with a unique skill set, a unique abilities. And obviously it's a spectrum disorder, so it's across multiple ways in which it affects an individual. So I don't want to speak that way, but I think it's really important to not think about it as something that needs to be fixed or solved, but rather something that's when it's early identified and we're really wrapping supports around the child and the parent, we know that kid's going to have the best opportunity to reach that full potential and to be able to maybe in some cases see it as a superpower even.
So how is families learn about First Five in order to get the help?
Yeah, so we do a lot of our services through our nonprofit partners. So First Five doesn't necessarily brand our services. We're not out there with a tremendous amount of workforce engaging with families. What we do is we partner with nonprofits that work in this prenatal to 5 space. We contract with them. We provide them funding to go ahead and do services. Sometimes we co-create the services when we see a gap in the marketplace. So typically, we serve over 50,000 families annually. So we're touching a lot of lives, but so lots of your listeners probably have been touched by a service that we provide, but they may not know it because it's being delivered through a nonprofit agency. One of the best ways and the pieces of which that we, when we think about all kids, some kids that may not need as much intervention as what I was just talking about before with speech or autism, but we have a great service out to all parents, which can be accessed on our website, which is Kid Builders, and it really reminds parents to be their kids' first and best teacher. Right? And that gets us to our second level of intervention, which is kids exist within families. So how do we support families in that interaction, the day-to-day interaction that they're having with kids in a way that promotes that child on a developmental trajectory to reach that full potential? So a free resource is Kid Builders. It goes across the 5 developmental domains, and it gives activities that parents can do that are absolutely free. They can do them in their house. They probably have all of the things that they need inside their home. That promotes development, and it gives them the logic for that family, why that activity is really important and why it's important to master that activity before a certain age. And that's another tool that parents can use when they go to their pediatrician's office. All of the activities were built and designed with the American Academy of Pediatrics, our local chapter's investment in it. So if a parent comes and says, hey, it says I should be doing tummy time with my infant, and that infant isn't able to do tummy time, sort of flops over, that is an important information for that pediatrician to have. So while Kid Builders reminds parents they can have fun with their kids, developmental activities are fun, they are play-based, and they are their kid's most important teacher. And that also helps that parent have a more constructive conversation with that pediatrician. So we do a lot of things that support family in that second ring of activities, which is really how do we bolster family interactions.
What are kids capable of doing at a young age?
Well, I believe, and obviously I'm drawn to this work, that the opportunities are endless. It's infinite possibilities. I mean, obviously we've all seen little kids and we know what they can't do and what their maturity levels might restrict them to do. But I think what we know is when kids have positive experiences consistently in their life that are laying the most important neurodevelopmental pathways for their brain development within this first 5 years. And we know that those neurodevelopmental pathways are richer, faster, bigger, whatever the adjective you want to use on it. I'm not a neurodevelopmental scientist, but when that foundation is put in place through rich developmental activities, strong bonds with caring adults that are consistent and consecutive, the possibilities are endless. For a kid, they can do so much, and they have that foundation to carry into adulthood. on the opposite side, we know when kids have a lot of adversity in their young lives and they're not provided into rich, positive environments that are focused on learning and developmentally appropriate activities, it actually stunts the development of their neurodevelopmental pathways, and it makes it difficult for them to reach their full potential as an adult. And that can be anything from education, relationship, career, those things we talk about, soft skills and kids missing soft skills. A lot of that is developed in those strong, positive, consistent interactions with adults that are developmentally appropriate.
And that starts when a person is pregnant?
Yeah. That building of those neurodevelopmental pathways really starts in utero and continues through those first 5 years of life for the majority of when that brain building is happening. So it's really important that, we make sure that pregnant women are supported as well as they move through their pregnancy into their first years of parenting and their families.
And then when the child is born, what kinds of activities do you recommend? Just kind of giving us an idea through age 5 to set them for the rest of their life.
So I'm going to focus on some interventions that are most important for some families who might be dealing with adversity within their family, might be having some risk factors. What we know in Orange County is of the roughly 35,000 births in Orange County, 14,000 of those births, if you looked at the assets present within that family at the time of birth, they're lacking. And that child is at risk of not being able to build those neurodevelopmental pathways in the way that we would want them to do it as a society. So we know that there's 14,000 families at time of birth that could really use some additional supports. And that is data that's available publicly. It's called the Strong Start Index that we use to help guide our work. And one of the evidence-based work areas that we fund and that we're huge supporters of is an area of work called home visiting, which is a little bit of a misnomer because you immediately think home. And while some of the interactions might in fact happen at home, it's really a one-on-one relationship between caregivers. That could be one parent, it could be multiple parents, or it could be other caregivers in the home, and an expert on those first 5 years of life. That could be a nurse, it could be a paraprofessional, but they've done training in an evidence-based model, and these models have some of the best evidence we know of in the nation to promote positive attachment, brain development, developmental milestone achievement. And so First Five funds a tremendous amount of these home visits within Orange County. We have a program that screens parents at birth. We screen about 70% of the births in Orange County and most of the major birthing hospitals, and we can refer in. It's voluntary, but we refer in to home visitation programs. We think it's an enormous benefit to families. It really helps them focus on the development of that child and guides them in ways that their investments of time and energy in ways that actually produce the evidence-based outcomes.
Explain neighborhoods supporting families.
Yeah, so this is when you think about those circles, right? So we started with a kid, then we moved to a parent. The next circle out is the neighborhood that we're raising these kids in, right? And we always, reference the famous line of "it takes a village to raise a kid." But those of us that have had kids, really, it does take a village. It takes a social connectivity, a grouping of access to resources within your community in order to be able to have that child on the most constructive pathway to reach their full potential. So one of the ways we think about neighborhoods is like a childcare. Basic need for most families here, particularly in Orange County and in California, where it takes double income for most families to be able to provide for their families. So we're going to need childcare. We know in Orange County right now, we have one licensed slot for a demand of over 20 kids in the infant and toddler. So we know that we don't have enough childcare in Orange County. So when I think about the neighborhood, I often think about the family within that neighborhood that doesn't have access to childcare. What decisions are they forced to make? Right? Those of us that were lucky enough to have parents that might be retired, well, I called in my parents and they helped me. That doesn't happen for a lot of our families. Either the parents are not in close proximity, the parents are still working. So what are we doing as a community to foster more childcare and more quality childcare? Because remember, it's about the quality as well. It's not just about access, but it's also about that child's going to spend a tremendous amount of time in childcare. What does that quality look like? And are we building towards developmental milestones? it's not necessarily always appropriate to hand that child off to any adult that's just in the neighborhood that's willing to watch that child. So one of the things that First Five has capitalized on is, well, maybe you are letting your neighbor take care of that child. What can First Five do to promote that as actually a workforce development? How do we get that person that's watching one child out of a favor to create a business around that and actually expand that child care network within communities? So one of the ways we think about neighborhood is through this child care initiative, where we've been recruiting and training families to become in-home child care providers, so to create a stream of income, increase the quality, and really make sure that that person that's willing to take care of a child is doing everything they can to think about the quality of that child care and the level of interactions that they're having with that child. And it's been really successful. We have a tremendous amount of families, individuals that have come through our training and that are getting licensed, and then and or doing what's called Friends, Family, and Neighbors that doesn't require a license, but it's a smaller amount of kids. We've seen tremendous success in this, and it's something we're going to continue to do.
Describe quality childcare.
Well, it's all the things we just talked about, right? So it's developmentally appropriate. So you're not, the expectations that a child care provider has on a child is relevant to that child's age and what's developmentally appropriate for that child. It's play-based, so it allows a lot of imaginative play, a lot of growth mentality for a child, not limited mentality. It's physically active. It's working on fine and gross motor skills. It's really being very aware and supportive of social emotional development and key milestones within social emotional development, again, all age appropriate. So those are all the components and structure of good quality childcare. I think so many times non-experts in early childhood immediately go to think about educational tasks, holding a pencil, recognizing numbers, and it's really important to know that in order to get to those sort of behavioral expectations and learning expectations we have for kids, we have to set the social emotional foundations for kids so that they're ready to take on that stuff. We have to allow for play and exploration because that's how a child learns first. So quality involves all of those things, and it really takes a special individual that's committed to young children to put on quality childcare.
What are some of the positive activities parents could do with their children right now to make an impact? And I guess the goal is to do as much before the age of 5 as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like an age-old, another age-old adage, which I would encourage people to think about quality, right? So as much maybe, but also quality. Right. So we want to be thinking about activities. When I was raising my 3 children, and I think what we know from our work with childcare and other child experts is you want to the extent possible, let child lead. Right. You want to know what they want to explore. So outdoor activities, going on a neighborhood investigation, looking for things, teaching them to learn and observe and talk about what they're seeing are great things to do with early explorers and early talkers, right? The more you can talk to them and get talk back, that's fantastic. When we're talking about infancy, it's things like tummy time. It's making sure that those muscles are working together, right? That we're reading and talking and singing. When we're talking about social emotional, it's naming emotions. It's thinking about your emotions. It's processing through them, identifying them, talking about the difference between emotions and behaviors. It's pro-social behavior. It's learning empathy. And helping to promote empathy when you see it among kids, and socialization among different kids having social interactions with their peer groups. These are all quality things that parents can do. But maybe in the way I'm talking about it too, I never want to make it sound too big. It could also be as easy as turning a pot over and grabbing a wooden spoon and hitting it and smiling and laughing and making up a song with that child. It could be drawing a picture together. It could be just sitting and reading a book. All of these are quality interactions that caregivers can do with children. It's really about the engagement, and it's about the interest and supporting that development. I don't want to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Now, you're funded by Prop 10 funds, which is tobacco tax. Is there enough? I understand people using tobacco, it's gone down. So is there enough funding to support the program?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I'm appreciative of it, because the simple answer to what you're asking me is no. When we started out in 1998, we received about double the revenue that we receive right now. Now, I want to be really careful and acknowledge the amazing public health effort that has taken place. We don't want people smoking, and We understand that in order to achieve that public health goal of less smoking, the tax has done exactly what it was supposed to do, and we're limiting the folks that are smoking. And so that is very, very good for the state of California and for the public health of California. And I don't want to mince words about that. But when we think about where we were 25 years ago as a society and the acknowledgement of what it took to create kids that would reach their full potential and what society and communities needed to do in terms of shifting their priorities. First Five did a lot of that work in the early years, which really created a demand for additional services, an acknowledgement that this time period is so very important, but it didn't come with a steady stream of revenue that other age groups and interventions receive. So when you think about public schools, right? While we can argue that they may not be fully funded, they are consistently funded and funded with rubric and an understanding. When you think about early childhood, it cuts across multiple systems, and those systems don't necessarily, they're not engineered to talk to each other. So if you're on public health, that's the Medi-Cal care system or Medi-Cal system run through the Department of Healthcare Services. Well, if you need subsidized childcare, that's through the Department of Social Services at the state of California. And if you're lucky enough to get into state preschool, you're going to be dealing with the California Department of Ed. If you've got a developmental delay, you're working with the regional centers within your community. So there isn't a comprehensive way to bring all of these system sectors together and focus on early childhood and create priorities and initiatives that directly affect early childhood. That is the role of First Five, and we embrace that role, and I think we've done a pretty good job of it, but I don't think the money that we have right now can sustain the work that we've been able to do and the footprint of the work that we've been able to do in Orange County. So we are looking at every way possible to increase our own revenue and then also advocate for the importance of prioritizing early childhood from a state of California budget perspective. If we care and we want to do more prevention and we want to stop managing crises, then we have to fund more on early childhood.
Give us your website, please.
First5OC.org.
Thank you, First Five Orange County President and Chief Executive Officer Kim Goll, for being on Impact OC. And I thank everyone for tuning in. I'm OC Talk Radio Public Affairs Director Dawn Camber. Have an impactful day.
You've been listening to Impact OC, the only program showcasing the people and organizations shaping our community. Right here on Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio.